You are listening to the Doug Hagmann Radio Show, weekdays 9 to 10 a.m. Eastern Time. And now the man behind the mic, a private investigator with over 30 years under his belt, Doug Hagmann.
Good morning, everyone. It's 6 a.m. on the west coast of America, 9 a.m. here in the east. Welcome to Hagmann. It is the Doug Hagmann Investigative Hour for today, Thursday, November 1st, 2018. Thanks for joining me this morning. We'll maybe be taking an in-depth look at a number of topics today. One of the biggest topics, one of the biggest issues, one of the subjects that I'm going to be focusing on is Robert Mueller. And he figures prominently into a number of recent events, of course, not the least of which is, well, he's the recipient, allegedly, of accusations of sexual improprieties being pushed to the forefront by GOP lobbyist Jack Berkman. Not much to say about that, really. I'm going to refrain from voicing any opinion on that. I do want to see what the press conference will say today, what Berkman will say at the press conference today. But the allegations, of course, against Mueller of sexual improprieties 8 years ago were submitted to the FBI for their handling this from Mueller. Now, the reason I'm focusing on Mueller is simply because of this. Mueller is at the epicenter, I believe, of a number of extremely important issues taking place today. Remember, Mueller is the special counsel, is acting as the special counsel right now against President Donald Trump. And regardless of what people might say in terms of him being a white hat, he's not. I don't believe that for 1 second. And I will respectfully disagree with anyone who does say that he is. Respectfully disagree, especially having intellectual discussions about that issue. And I know that there are numerous people positing certain facts about Mueller's role and everything. And I think it'll become clear in the coming months. I say months because I think subsequent to the midterm elections, we're going to see some revelations about Mueller that we've already seen, but will be repackaged and brought out again. Now, I'm referring to specifically a 48-page document. And folks, let me just be honest with you. We were, and be transparent, I should say, with you. I always worry when I use that phrase because people who usually say, let me be honest, let me be frank, let me be truthful, when they predicate something, it's usually they're blowing smoke up your skirt. All right. But not in this case. I'm trying to give you as much transparent information as I can. I say that because we took yesterday off. We've been working, Eric, the tech, Joe, myself, we've been working 18 hours a day for 10 days straight. Washington, traveling. It's just, just an unbelievably punishing schedule. So we had to take last night off. And in so doing, we also had meetings, or had a meeting about the state of our platform, where we were headed, our goals, our objectives, and such that I'll share with you. Well, first I'll share with those who support us, because, of course, that's why you support us, to give you the information first. And speaking of that, I was looking, and during the meetings, plural, but the one meeting that we had yesterday among the members of this organization, we realized that we are 36%, only 36%, not 43, but 36% away from our goal, our Patreon goal, as of 6 p.m. yesterday. So my request to everyone listening, if you are able and if you believe in us as an alternative news source, as members of the new media, please support us financially. And I ask this humbly, knowing, of course, a couple of things. Number one, Money is, how you spend your money is, well, you have finite resources. I get that. And you have to be very careful in terms of how you spend your money, where you spend it. And I understand that. The second part is, too, we are very careful in how we spend or how we invest the money we receive from our supporters. We don't we don't spend recklessly. And as an example, what you saw from the walkaway march, for example, the footage that you saw was recorded on equipment that we purchased through your support. Now, if you look at the footage that we took with a critical eye from a engineering standpoint, you will see that differs than all other footage out there. And I say that because we were able to research, purchase the proper equipment, and make sure that we did, made one purchase, made it right. And from that, we were able to provide you with the best product, meaning the best footage out there. And I'm just giving you that as one example. So we need tools in our toolbox to accomplish what we need to accomplish. Cameras, additional switching equipment here, and servers here, in order to become completely anonymous, unplugged from YouTube and all of the other dependent networks on the internet. In other words, to be completely autonomous, not dependent upon Facebook, Twitter, not dependent upon YouTube. Now, I've said in the past that we've accomplished that. We have to a large extent, and there are recurring bills, of course, that unbelievably expensive for bandwidth, for servers, server space, server upgrades and maintenance. It's just never ending. So I said that just to say that we're about 36% of our goal, and we hope to get to 100% here within the next 60 days, 90 days. I don't know. So I'm just humbly asking you to support us. But that aside, we do read, consider, and talk about emails that we receive, or we go over things. And one of the issues that I mentioned in yesterday's program was about Robert Mueller and Whitey Bulger. Now, Whitey Bulger is the mafia boss, 89 years old, who was murdered in Hazleton, West Virginia, in a prison in Hazleton, West Virginia, 2 days ago. And that was on Tuesday, October 30th. And I bring this up because I received an email from a listener who said, yeah, I'd like to hear more about this. So I'm going to give you a little bit more information about this as it ties into Robert Mueller, as it ties into the larger issue of federal government, the FBI, the weaponization of the FBI, and the behavior of the FBI as it relates to not just the weaponization used to form the special counsel against President Trump as an extension of the deep state actors, but also as to show you that this is a continuing course of criminal conduct within or at the hands of what I would term a criminal element within the intelligence community, specifically at the higher and highest levels of the FBI, that you and I pay for. Mueller, in my opinion, and as documented through research done by people such as Sidney Powell in License to Lie, Representative Louis Gohmert in his 48-page document, his report that was issued, published last spring, or this past spring. By the way, I started to mention this. For Patreon members, I do want to populate our Patreon members only forum. We've got to get that up and running. I've been saying that now for a while. We're just doing the best we can. Again, we're a finite staff. We don't have the resources. For example, InfoWars, we don't have this 65, 68 people working. We have really a very limited staff. So we we're very careful about how we spend our money or your money, your support, and we're very, very conscientious about how we do things. We operate very, very close, and again, we don't want to squander the donations and contributions that you make. So, but getting back to Robert Mueller, special counsel right now, but looking back a little bit further into Mueller's past, and again, the reason this is important is because it shows, it illustrates what Mueller is about. Again, if you're looking at Mueller as a white hat, look at what he's done in the past. And from his past activities, can we say, all right, he's working to protect or prosecute the deep state? I think not. Before I get in depth about Mueller, just a few things I want to touch upon. We've got Operation Faithful Patriot. You see a video showing hundreds of military vehicles being shipped to the southern border. I would assert that that's what our military is used for, to protect, first and foremost, to protect the United States of America. And in my conversation, and I had a direct conversation with a member of the President Trump, with a member of the administration of President Donald Trump over the past several days, actually a couple of conversations. President Trump is extremely dedicated to the protection of our borders and specifically the southern border. Now, that branches off into a couple of different subjects or different topics I'm not going to address today. The 14th Amendment, which is nothing more than you're being played if the 14th Amendment gets drawn into this discussion, this specific discussion, as it relates to illegal immigrants in this country. Don't believe what you see and hear from the mainstream media. It's amazing the depth of ignorance about our Constitution, specifically by members of the media, whether they're either uneducated about the 14th Amendment, uneducated about our Constitution, or specifically or deliberately duplicitous with respect to how they're framing the narrative or framing the discussion. The Constitution does not permit, does not authorize, just in a sentence, does not authorize or allow members or illegal aliens born in this country. It does not bestow upon them automatic citizenship, despite what you hear in the media. A number of people have done great articles on this. Former and current guests of our show have done great articles. Daniel Horowitz, for example, Mark Levin, and others. But that's a side topic. I'm going to table that for right now, because again, my focus is Mueller and what's going on right now. And oh, by the way, the border surge is at its highest since 2011. And in case you're wondering, each illegal costs taxpayers about $70,000. That's per illegal, per capita, which, by the way, is about 7 times greater than the cost of deportation. So if you are engaged in an argument or a discussion about the cost to the American taxpayer, the cost to you and I, every illegal alien in this country coming into this country or already here cost taxpayers $70,000. To deport them, about $1,000, roughly. That's 7 times the deportation price. So in other words, keeping them here is 7 times greater than deporting them. And then of course you've got the discussion about who is paying or who is supporting this alien invasion. And you had President Trump sending out a recent tweet. I wouldn't be surprised if George Soros was paying for this foreign invasion caravan. And of course, some of the videos that you see out there on Twitter, even retweeted by well-meaning, well-intended members of the conservative base, you've got to be really careful of what you tweet out. For example, pictures of people being paid. Well, how do you know that's real money or that's money? For example, there's one, I think it's a 29-second clip that's been retweeted so many times that it's questionable about what the individuals depicted in the video are handing out. Alternatively, for example, when Joe and I were at a recent rally here in our home city of Erie, Pennsylvania, we witnessed and were able to identify individuals paying protesters cash money, identified as, that's right, legal tender, cash money, greenbacks, whatever you want to call them, and tracing that money back to the source-related entities. So again, we have to be careful on what we assume are facts versus what would appear to be facts and what really aren't. All right. In other news as well, again, before I get deeply involved in the topic at hand, you've got Andrew Gillum, which the exposure of Andrew Gillum's staff in undercover sting videos, it would be worth your time to view those videos, to see what Gillum is saying publicly versus what the staffers are saying privately. And of course, that's an endeavor of Project Veritas. Very interesting indeed. And then one more very important issue. We spoke and we continue to talk about the censorship issue. Well, Google, Alphabet, and the big tech companies are colluding with the Democratic Party. They're colluding with the mainstream media. They're colluding with various high-level socialists who are engaged in the political system, of course, to censor conservative candidates and their messages. Now, this has been brought out in numerous reports anywhere on the internet if you can find them. Again, Google and Alphabet, social media companies colluding with the DNC, colluding with the legacy media, the dinosaur media, to tamper with, to meddle in the 2018 midterm elections. Again, by blocking campaign ads by conservative, for example, one instance, conservative Marsha Blackburn. It's amazing to see this. You talk about election tampering and the accusations of election tampering going back to 2016. Well, this is even worse, by orders of magnitude much worse right now, which shows the desperation of the Democratic Socialists and the Socialist Party. I will say this: I believe in my heart of hearts, and based upon my prayers and my thoughts, and that I believe that we are going to see a red victory. In other words, a conservative victory in the midterms. I say that contingent, of course, upon people going and voting. And I say that despite and with the knowledge of the election tampering with respect to the black box voting. Look, I know that there will be a tremendous voter fraud out there. I know that to be a fact. In fact, there are reports of voter fraud already being reported, coming in, favoring, of course, the Democratic Party. And again, this is an area, too, where you've got to separate the anecdotal evidence or postings on Facebook. Look, my friend, I was at the hairdresser's, my friend told me this story. Okay, you've got to separate that from the facts. So we have to run and be very careful with what we post or what we retweet or repost. We have to be factual. But again, the election tampering and the voter fraud, a big issue in this midterm election. And I know you get tired of hearing and speaking about the midterms and about politics. Look, I understand that. I do too. But if we are successful, and I think we will be, in combating or overcoming the voter fraud, in spite of the voter fraud, much like 2016, in spite of the election tampering in 2016, President Trump won a victory And he did that through the Electoral College, of course. The victory was via the Electoral College. However, I do believe once you take away the fraudulent votes in the popular votes, I would strongly suggest, and this is based on just cumulative research, that he also won the popular vote. But again, that aside, the midterms, of course, I do believe will be a red tsunami to the extent that we will keep and gain seats in the House and perhaps even the Senate. Definitely keep the Senate, but perhaps gain seats in the Senate. But again, it's contingent upon getting out there and voting. And the early voting, the records or the reports from early voting, the on-the-ground reports show a very strong showing for the Republican Party, for the conservatives. So that gives me hope. But we've got to get out there and do it and help others to the polls as well. Other conservatives, if you know someone who's housebound, take someone to the polls with you. I intend to do that this election day, and I would urge you to do the same. Because, look, I understand the role of politics in the larger scheme of things. I understand that the largest of large, the big picture here, we are engaged in a spiritual battle at heart. But I also know that we have to be good stewards here on earth and fight that spiritual battle here as we have been appointed by God Almighty, if you are a Bible-believing Christian, and most of my audience is. So that's that. So those are some of the issues that are just kind of flying around out there. Again, the argument about the birthright citizenship, stopping that, the 14th Amendment, these are all just these are all canards that you really don't necessarily... We can put the accusations of President Trump being a dictator, of course, by invoking some sort of executive action with respect to the illegal alien birthright issue. Don't fall for that discussion. Do not allow the media pundits to distract from the real issues by talking about birthright citizenship and President Trump's ability to effect that via executive order and the constitutional protections afforded by the 14th Amendment, because that argument, it's not a real argument. It's not. It's in fact, there's a whole history of the 14th Amendment and birthright citizenship. It really wasn't massaged into what it is today until the late 50s and early 60s. And perhaps tomorrow I'll have that discussion in greater detail. But I really want to get to Mueller right now. All right, so last Tuesday, Whitey Bulger, this mob boss, originally from the Boston area, 89 years old, was transferred to the Hazleton prison in West Virginia. This is a federal prison, and there he was immediately placed into the general population. Now, Hazleton, West Virginia, that prison they house 1,277 inmates, so 1,277 inmates in that prison. Whitey Bulger, bad guy, mob boss, 89 years old, life of crime, legacy of crime, stating himself that he murdered 40 people as a career criminal, as a mob boss, has been convicted and is serving a sentence for killing 11 people. So 29 more people he's saying he killed as opposed to what he's been convicted of, among other crimes as well. But he was murdered in his prison cell in the general population on Tuesday. As a matter of fact, he was beaten so severely that he would be unrecognizable. But more importantly, and I don't want to be too graphic here, the perpetrators who killed Bulger attempted to cut out his tongue. Very significant. Again, I apologize for the graphic nature of that. And also either from the beating or deliberately removed at least one of his eyes. So again, I apologize for the graphic nature of this, but that's the severity of the beating which led to his death. His corpse was unrecognizable. So what does that have to do with with the special counsel, with President Trump, with Robert Mueller, and the whole shebang? What does that have to do with anything? Well, stick with me because I'll tell you exactly what it's got to do with everything. In order to understand, at least in my view, the selection of Robert Mueller as the special counsel, and to understand his role as the director of the FBI during his tenure and what he had done, you've got to really look at his history. And this past, as I mentioned, this past spring, Representative Louis Gohmert had published a 48-page white paper on Robert Mueller, titled Robert Mueller Unmasked. Now, according to Louis Gohmert, the preface of this presentation, of this report, is that Robert Mueller has had a long and sordid history of illicitly targeting innocent people that is a stain upon the legacy of American jurisprudence. Now think about that in terms of the special counsel. Stated by Louis Gohmert, he lacks the judgment and credibility to lead the prosecution of anyone, and according to Louis Gohmert, he does not make these statements lightly. And the information within that document that I reference certainly suggests that to be true. And Gohmert said that each time I prepared to question Mueller during congressional hearings, the more concerned he became about his work ethic. Then as Gohmert went back to begin compiling all of the information in order to recount personal interactions with Mueller, the more clearly the big picture began to come into focus. And again, I'm a big picture guy, so I can relate to this. Wrote by Gohmert, at one point, I had to make the decision to stop adding to this, or it would turn into a far too lengthy of a project. Gohmert's goal was to share some firsthand information, as other Republican members of Congress had requested, adding, "You seem to know so much about him." And this report was prepared from Gohmert's viewpoint to help better inform everyone about the special prosecutor leading the effort to railroad President Donald Trump through whatever manufactured charge he can allege. And judging by Mueller's history, it doesn't matter who he has to threaten, who he has to harass or prosecute or bankrupt to get someone to be willing to allege something or anything about President Trump. It certainly appears that Mueller will do whatever it takes to bring down his target, ethically or unethically. This according to Louis Gohmert. So let's go back a little bit. How about former Attorney General Eric Holder? What does he have to say? Sounds like much the same thing. Holder stated, "I've known Bob Mueller for 20 or 30 years. My guess he's just trying to make the case as good as he possibly can." Now, Holder does not really know him. He's seen Mueller at work when Holder was obstructing justice himself and acting in contempt of Congress. Now, he knows Mueller's FBI framed innocent people and had no remorse in doing so. So here we've got the perfect Alinsky tool in the form of Robert Mueller. And I'm not sure how much of this information has really been discussed in this great of detail. But as this relates to both President Trump and Whitey Bulger and his murder, I don't believe in coincidences. What was that all about? Moving him to a prison at age 89 here this past week. And how does that kind of fit into the scheme of things that we see playing out today? I'm going to tell you. So this, again, referencing that 48-page report by Louis Gohmert, it contains a lot of damaging and damning information about Robert Mueller. And notes Gohmert in this report that any Republican who says anything resembling that Mueller, hey, he's going to do a good job as special counsel, or he's got a great reputation for being fair, or anything similar, any person who says that, A, wants President Trump indicted for something and removed from office regardless of his innocence, B, is intentionally ignorant of the the number of outrageous problems permeating Mueller's professional history? Or C, is cultivating future Democrat votes when he or she comes before the Senate someday for a confirmation hearing? Very interesting, again, in light of what we've seen with various confirmation hearings about Kavanaugh and others. And think about this in the grander scheme of things. Think about Mueller's reputation and history in the grander scheme of things, because you're going to see tweets and memes on social networks, Twitter and Facebook, about Mueller. He's coming. He's a pit bull. He's a bulldog. He's coming after you. Well, that might be true, but at what cost? Does he even care about someone's innocence? Or does he just want, does he care about innocence? Does he care about facts? You would be surprised based on the Hagmann Report alone. There is simply too much clear and convincing information that Robert Mueller is acting, well, he's a black hat. In his early years as FBI director, most Republican members of Congress, they gave Mueller a pass in their oversight hearings, and they avoided asking him tough questions. And think back to various hearings of Mueller. Think of the treatment that Mueller got. Very, very soft glove treatment. After all, Mueller was appointed by George W. Bush, so he can't be all that bad. At least not from a Republican point of view. This is where the toxicity of the political parties comes into play. Hagmann himself fell into that trap early on, giving him easy questions when he first had him before Congress back in 2005. And that was out of deference to his Vietnam service, his service in Vietnam as this war veteran. But the more that Hagmann began to dig into the past of Mueller, the more conspicuous and obvious the problems with Robert Mueller became. And writes Hagmann, as Hagmann had said before of another Vietnam veteran, just because someone deserves our respect for service or our sympathy for things that happened to them in the military, that does not give them the right to harm our country later. Well, let's dig into Mueller's history just briefly. And again, I'll tie this all up as it relates to what's going on today. I'm going to go back a little ways, go back into the early time of Mueller. The Boston Globe. Now, I've got archived copies of the Boston Globe, but the Boston Globe noted that Robert Mueller's connection with the Whitey Bulger case is significant. There is an article titled "One Lingering Question for FBI Director Robert Mueller." Now, this was published in the Boston Globe. I'm going to read you the passage here and then expand upon this. Mike Albano, the former parole board member who was threatened by two FBI agents for considering parole for the men imprisoned for a crime they did not commit. This Mike Albano was appalled that Mueller was appointed as FBI director because it was Mueller, first as a U.S. assistant attorney, then as acting U.S. attorney in Boston, who wrote letters to the Parole and Pardons Board throughout the 1980s opposing clemency for four men framed by FBI lies. And of course, Mueller was also in that position while Whitey Bulger was helping the FBI cart off his criminal competitors, even as he buried bodies in shallow graves along the Neponset. Now, Mueller was the head of the criminal division as assistant U.S. attorney, then as acting U.S. attorney. All right? That's during his career. And you can look up the specifics of his career. I'm just taking a bigger picture approach here. And some of this is referenced, again, in Sidney Powell's book, License to Lie. And that talks about the corruption within the higher echelons of the Department of Justice and the FBI, including but not limited to Mueller. But here's the deal with Robert Mueller once again, acting as the head of the criminal division, as assistant U.S. attorney, then acting U.S. attorney in Boston. What Mueller did was engage in prosecution, this mob against the mob, but allowed four innocent men to go to prison. Now, these four men who were innocent of the crime with which they were charged were obviously they're bad guys, definitely bad guys, part of the organized crime or mafia. But Mueller knew they were innocent, or at least had reason to believe that they were innocent. And Mueller at that time, just to make this short without getting into too much detail, withheld exculpatory evidence from the courts just to get convictions. But when I say just to get convictions, it's a little bit more than that. You have opposing mafia families, these opposing families within the organized crime circuit, right? Well, Mueller was helping one family over another. And by doing so, he allowed four guys to be sent to prison innocent of the crime for which they were prosecuted, while Mueller knew that there was evidence that would prove them innocent. And he kept that from ever reaching the court. And this is kind of I could spend 3 or 4 hours on this case alone. But just the takeaway from this is Robert Mueller, in his position as prosecutor, as U.S. attorney prosecuting federal crimes, allowed four men to go to jail for a crime they did not commit. And again, these are not good guys, they're bad guys, but it's the tactics, plural, of Mueller in that capacity to just look the other way. Then you've got, in addition to that, the corruption at the upper levels of the FBI. From the Boston Globe, I had referenced that member of the former parole board member, who was threatened by 2 FBI agents for considering parole for men in prison for a crime that they did not commit. And who was, again, this guy, Michael Albano, was threatened by 2 of Mueller's FBI agents. Okay, so now you see this tactic now that's being used by Mueller. Oh, and by the way, the FBI actually it cost the taxpayers $100 million. $100 million was paid to the defendants, the defendants who were framed by FBI agents under the control and the direction of Robert Mueller for false imprisonment. Thanks to the FBI's corruption, taxpayers, you and I, got stuck with the $100 million bill for compensating the men framed under Mueller. Oh, and also, 2 of those guys, last names Greco and Tamilio, died in prison. The New York Times weighed in on this particular case, and they explained the relationship this way. It was in the 1980s, while FBI agent John Connolly, was working with Whitey Bulger. Again, Mr. Mueller was assistant U.S. attorney in Boston in charge of the criminal division. And for a period of time was the acting U.S. attorney, as I mentioned there, presiding over FBI agent Connolly and Mr. Bulger as a top echelon informant. And officials of the Massachusetts State Police and the Boston Police Department had long wondered why their investigations of Whitey Bulger were always compromised before they could gather evidence against him. And they suspected that the FBI, under Mueller, was protecting him. In other words, Whitey Bulger was being protected by none other than Robert Mueller. Now, if Mueller had no knowledge, for example, that the FBI he was using were engaged in criminal activity, then he certainly was incredibly stupid or blind that he should never have been in the position in which he was. He should never have been a criminal case supervisor, because he certainly helped continue to contribute to the damages of the framed individual by working so hard to prevent them from being paroled out of prison, even as their charges were on their way to being completely thrown out. So what I'm talking about here is the framing of innocent people, granted bad people, but innocent of the charges, and the upper level FBI corruption. By the way, Connolly, the FBI agent, is serving 40 years in prison for his criminal activity under Bob Mueller, in this case. Now, if I sound rather halting and my speech is rather halting here, this is complicated. The facts are complicated, but I want to be very accurate in just conveying just enough of the information where you don't get bogged down in all of the details, but you can see the bigger picture of what Robert Mueller did and what he is doing today. Because the same process that he used, the same tactics, much like I talk about all of the time, the same tactics used by the deep state are being used over and over and over again. They don't have much imagination. And in this case, Mueller doesn't either. In fact, Mueller has got this, I don't know how else to say it, the continuing course of behavior that is being used against President Trump today. Oh, one other thing that Louis Gohmert mentioned in his report, he referenced leaks throughout the prosecution and throughout the handling of the Bulger case and other high-profile criminal cases under Robert Mueller in Boston as a U.S. attorney. There were always leaks, and leaks that disparaged Mueller's targets. In the case of Whitey Bulger, the leaks were to organized crime, the mob. Okay, now, one of the basic tenets of our judicial system in our constitutional republic is that we don't imprison people for being bad people. And Dan Bongino talks about this. You investigate a crime. You don't investigate the person in search of a crime. And anyone in prison has to have committed a specific crime for which they're found guilty. And the exception to that is Robert Mueller. As cited by Louis Gohmert, he has the reverse list of Santa Claus. And if you're on his list, you get punished even if you are framed. And he never apologizes when the truth is learned, no matter how wrong or potentially criminal or malicious the prosecution was. In his world, in Mueller's world, you deserve what you get, even if you did not commit the crime for which he helped put you away. Okay, so the Whitey Bulger case, under his purview, involved a murder. In this case, 4 individuals were imprisoned for a murder, and I'm not going to get into the particulars of it. Anyway, Mueller oversaw the prosecution, and he knew these 4 guys were innocent or not guilty of that specific crime, despite being bad guys. They didn't do this. Ultimately, Mueller was shown to have been participated in this. Going after these 4 guys. The 4 guys later the convictions were found to have no merit, and it cost the taxpayers $100 million. Not to mention what it did to the 4 guys in prison. Again, not good guys. So you're dealing with, I get it, they're bad guys, they're members of the mob, but still, it's the tactics of Mueller that we're interested in here. And the consequences to the taxpayers to the tune of $100 million. It's a chunk of change. So that's some insight into Mueller's tactics. And in that specific case, the person who knew the facts, who knew that there was exculpatory evidence, who knew about Mueller's, about his methods, that guy was Whitey Bulger. And Whitey Bulger, inexplicably, at his advanced age of 89 years old, was transferred from the prison where he was held for quite some time to Hazleton in West Virginia, put in the general population, and within 24 hours of his arrival was beaten to death. Think about this now. Whitey Bulger, by the way, coincidentally was reportedly going to expose the FBI and Robert Mueller, and to tell the world, to tell the good guys about Mueller's propensity to withhold exculpatory evidence. And suddenly he's dead. Now, I just want to say something very quickly here. You might say, well, this Whitey Bulger guy, he was a bad guy. He killed 11 people, that for sure, that at least he was, for which he was convicted. He bragged about killing upwards of 40. He was a mob guy. He was just a bad guy. I understand that. I agree with you on that. However, are we a nation of laws? How do we treat the individuals who are in our custody? Do we send them to their certain deaths at the hands of other prisoners? And by the way, the Hazleton prison where he was sent again to the general population, and within that general population were the guys that wanted to shut Bulger up. They had everything to gain by shutting him up. Other bad guys, and they did. And so even though this guy was one of the worst, and no one's really shedding a tear about his death, that's not the point. The point is, what is going on? What in the world is going on where you can have this iconic, and I don't say that in a glamorous way, this bad guy, this mafia boss, being sent ultimately to his death, knowingly, by the upper echelon of the FBI and the Department of Justice, knowing what's going to happen, and no one cares. It's just saying, well, another bad guy dead, good. We're saving the taxpayers' money. But the other side of that is Bulger was going to talk, and he was going to give information to the good guys, the white hats, about Mueller and about his corruption, allegedly. This is what's being alleged, and I tend to agree with this, during his time as a U.S. attorney and during his time as head of the FBI, which, by the way, he still had control over Bulger as in that position, and by extension, as special counsel, he still has influence and control over some of the workings within the FBI. So just because he's out of the FBI, working and operating as a special counsel in that position, does not mean he does not have the contacts. So it's important to understand what is taking place. So you had a potential witness, in short, in sum and substance, you had a potential witness that would expose, at his advanced age, 89 years old, somebody that was being handled by Mueller, and of course, certain FBI agents, at least one who is serving a prison sentence for corruption, about to spill the beans on Mueller's activities in withholding evidence and other such activities, showing up dead, being beaten to death. Maybe that's a message. Is it not a message to others? Don't talk, because you'll wind up like Whitey Bulger. And that's kind of a thumbnail sketch. But that's just one example of numerous examples that should tell you everything you need to know about Robert Mueller. Mueller, however you want to pronounce his name. And the 48-page report, I'll just say this. The 48-page report by Louis Gohmert, again released earlier this year, has many examples, some worse than others, about his tactics and about his methods. The ends justify the means, of course, as any good socialist progressive would adopt those tactics. So that's where Whitey Bulger comes in. Well, why now, too? Because Mueller is specifically vulnerable, or would have been extremely vulnerable, had the information that Whitey Bulger had get out in front of testimony at the advanced age of 89. This guy, how long is he going to live? How long will he be in prison? How much more time does he have? And to disclose what he knows about Mueller. Move him, get rid of him, get rid of the threat. Hey, people get killed in prison all of the time. In fact, Hazleton, that prison itself, I think 3 deaths in the past, 3 murders in the past year or 6 months or something like that. But this was a move, in my professional belief, this is my speculation, this was a move to avoid any damaging evidence against Mueller by someone on the inside, used as a confidential informant, or at the very least, to expose the rot within the upper tier of the FBI, and specifically the rot surrounding Robert Mueller. That's what this is all about. Timing, not coincidental. Events, not coincidental. So why is this important to talk about? Because none of the mainstream media outlets are talking about this. Any such revelation would expose the tactics and the criminality, in my view, of Robert Mueller. So as you look through the legacy, the life, the times, the MO of now Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller, and see that he has assembled a team, as Sean Hannity has said and others have said, of extremely biased attorneys to comprise the special counsel team. These are investigators and attorneys working to stop the election of Donald Trump, now working to impeach Donald Trump. Understanding this, especially in the context, or as we approach the 2018 midterm elections, should the Republicans, for example, lose the House, specifically the House, this will all be buried. And as a matter of fact, the efforts to impeach Donald Trump will just exponentially rise or become more aggressive. And the modus operandi, the various crimes, and I say that, this is my opinion, crimes committed by Robert Mueller will be forever buried. They've got to win the election. The left has got to win this midterms, because should they not, continued investigation, continued hearings at the congressional level will expose Mueller's operations and his tactics and his quest to impeach President Trump, because he is pushing for the impeachment, and he's doing so in a manner just like he did with Whitey Bulger, leaks, withholding exculpatory information, and just playing bad ball, no rules, basically. So we've seen through all of this, just citing Whitey Bulger alone, Mueller's MO does not seem, it has not changed. Again, he's hired these anti-Donald Trump lawyers and investigators, no Republicans. He's handpicked the various people on his team. And Hannity's gone through this. The analysis of FEC records show his relationship with Andrew Weissman, Jeannie Rhee, Goldstein, James Quarles, and I can go on and on and on. All of these individuals who comprise this special counsel team are viciously anti-Donald Trump, and of course they are stooges of the deep state, and it's important to know. But unfortunately, if you listen to Fox News and even Sean Hannity, who I like, they don't get down deep into the facts here, where, yeah, okay, these are all pro-Hillary, pro-DNC people. But what this involves is Mueller at the epicenter of this hit team within the FBI, within the Department of Justice, and ruining lives. For example, General Michael Flynn, a man who was caught up in this manufactured controversy from the second that he stepped into his role in the Donald Trump administration. Mueller and his team ruined the life of General Michael Flynn and ruined his reputation, as well as others. Just go back, by the way, to even the DOJ and the FBI, their handling of Enron, Arthur Anderson. It's not what you think. If you read License to Lie, you'll get an eyeful of the documentation. But this also gets into the FISA abuse today, and his MO. Mueller's MO has not changed. Mueller ignoring provable crimes involving the Clinton campaign, the FBI, the FISA court, the intelligence communities, the strategically timed leaks. When you compare his activities with Bulger back in the 80s to today, the same MO. And now we're seeing it play out against President Donald Trump and other figures, including but not limited to General Michael Flynn, and you're going to see it continue to play out. So Mueller is at the epicenter. He is the weaponized tool of the deep state. And now, just to kind of tie this up, to go back, Whitey Bulger, knowing the very specific events, occasions, and facts about Robert Mueller at 89, serving a life sentence in prison, being transferred from a prison where he was safe to a prison where within 24 hours Whitey Bulger was murdered, and his tongue, they tried to cut out his tongue. Not to be gross, but that's what happened. And that sent a message, I believe, to others. Don't talk. And by the way, prison is not going to protect you. We can get you anywhere. That, my friends, is the legacy of Robert Mueller, whatever you want to call him. That's his legacy. And I would definitely suggest you read the 48-page document by Louis Gohmert, because it was Mueller, as we know, elected a week before 9/11 and continuing his tenure well beyond the 10-year in and out program established as FBI directors and as high top echelon FBI individuals. As he went beyond that, the manner in which he purged, for example, the FBI training manuals, purging it of any kind of reference to Islamic terrorism, the training manuals that were purged of that information, and so many other issues, so many other things that he had done. And oh, by the way, this even goes back to pre-9/11 times. When you look at Kurt Weldon, remember that name, Kurt Weldon, Able Danger, the warning by Representative Kurt Weldon and his team, where Kurt Weldon said, "Hey, wait a minute, Able Danger, we identified the so-called Islamic terrorists back long before 9/11. Who put the kibosh on that? It was Robert Mueller. So the MO hasn't changed. Robert Mueller is now continuing he's looking for a Democratic win in order to solidify the impeachment of President Donald Trump. Bulger presented a threat to him, much like Weldon did for 9/11, but in this case a much more present-day threat. Bulger is no longer sucking air. And I've got to say this. This was no coincidence. His murder was not a coincidence. And that's kind of the deep dive into this without getting into the particulars of Bulger's case and the case of the framed men and the case of the dirty FBI agent. That's the big picture. So this is why I've been so hot on making sure that we retain leadership in the House. Because without that, if we lose the House, none of this will be brought to light. As a matter of fact, it'll all be buried, and the impeachment of Donald Trump will move forward with a velocity like you've never seen and an aggressiveness like you've ever seen. I hope this made sense, and if it did, please share this with other people, and thank you so much for listening. Thanks for being a part of the Hagmann Report and the Doug Hagmann Investigative Hour. May God bless each and every one of you.
The Doug Hagmann Radio Show is brought to you by the Hagmann Report. Tune in to the Hagmann Report weekdays, 7 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. For more information, go to HagmannReport.com. That's HagmannReport.com.